Hi, this is Holly Robbins again with Effective Dialogue Basics. After my last video, you wrote down a few of your inner conflicts that you have, and we've come to embrace that now. Instead of thinking of inner conflict as being completely useless, we're going to use that inner conflict to be able to discover the roles that we have in our heads, all the different roles, all the different neural pathways, all the different lab rats that exist in our laboratory up here. And then we're going to today to reconcile these neural pathways. We're going to reconcile the relationships up in our head. The reason I am so excited about that is because once we have learned how to reconcile relationships within our own head, we can learn how to reconcile relationships with other people in our relationships out in the world. The more people who learn how to do that, the better the world is going to become. So we're going to just get started today, and I'm really excited to share this information with you. We talked in the last video about the inner conflict that I had while I was at the grocery store when I ran into my friend and I had my kids there and they were freaking out, and I wanted to be in the relationship with my friend and attend to my kids at the same time and couldn't, and they were freaking out. And then I was worried about what people in the store were thinking about me at the same time. That inner conflict helped me to define those three different roles in my head. It helped me to see those three different lab rats in my laboratory that I needed to work with. And so that's what I'd like to do with you today. If you have written down any of your inner conflicts, look down at that piece of paper and look at the roles that you wrote down along the side. They might be your role in relationship to another person. It could be if you're married, it could be your spouse. If you're in a romantic relationship, it could be that partner self of you that is in relationship with that partner. And we're not going to talk about the other person in the relationship. We're just going to talk about what's happening inside you when you are playing that role with that other person. Now, if you have written down those roles on that paper by your inner conflict, you will notice that you've probably had inner conflicts between those two or three roles, however many you have there. You've probably had a bunch of different inner conflicts with those, and it just keeps coming back again and again. This is one really great incentive to be able to learn how to reconcile the differences in your head. And the way we're going to do that is accessing right now your analytical self. And I would like you just to make an observation about three things. The first thing I want you to observe is that those roles are in your head. And they are there permanently, and you're not getting rid of either one. Notice how even when the more dominant of the roles tells the more submissive of the roles, you're stupid, go away, or whatever, ignores it or whatever, that they're still there. And so I need your analytical self to acknowledge that those roles are in your head and they are there to stay. Right? So with that being the case, the next thing I need you to realize is that if there's going to be conflict between them, or enmity or hatred or anything unproductive like that, you are not going to be enjoying a lot of inner peace. You can see that too, right? And the third thing I want you to recognize is that relationships flow a lot more smoothly when there is mutual respect. So with those three observations in place, the important thing now is for you, the analytical self, to draw that to the attention of the other selves that you're dealing with right now. Those other two or three roles that you have written down for that conflict. Up until this point, you may have been unconscious, first of all, of these other roles. And another thing is you may have been unconscious of their conflict. You're simply experiencing the lack of peace that you would otherwise have. But you haven't really, perhaps up to this point, you haven't really noticed the mechanics of the conflict that's going on inside of you. And so it's the job of the analytical self now to draw that to the attention of the parties involved in your head. Now, I have observed that with decent people, once they realize that they have been hurting someone, they immediately want to apologize and change their way of doing things. An example I have of this is that there is a child self inside of me that was for a very long time getting shoved aside. I would not notice, or I would ignore the fact that I was hungry, for example, and just discipline myself right through whatever I was trying to do, completely ignoring the needs of that child self inside me. Or if that child self felt sad or disappointed or something, I would just shove those feelings aside and try not to think about it and just not deal with the feelings that that inner child was having, because I was just feeling like it was too inconvenient. I had other things to do, and that little one was just getting smashed all the time. And so when I recognized that and I drew that to the attention of my other selves, my more dominant selves, the ones that were always getting their way, they were like, whoa, we've been hurting someone. So it was time to apologize, and not only apologize, but to commit to do better, to commit to pay more attention to what my body was needing, to what the feelings were that I was feeling, and make sure that I wasn't just plowing through. So when I did this, I actually did it in the mirror, and I did it vocally. Somebody else might like to do it on paper. They might like to draw the reconciliation. They might like to write it out. For me, it really helps to stand in the mirror and to have a dialogue among those parties. So what I did was basically tell that little self, here are the things that I did. Here are the things that I do that hurt you. And I notice that now, and I apologize, and I'm not going to do that to you anymore. And now initially, that little emotional self, having been beaten down so much, didn't believe it. There was not a lot of trust. So that was the beginning of a brand new relationship. That was the beginning of my more dominant self seeking to earn the trust of that little one. And it meant that I had to eat more often. It meant that when I had to go to the bathroom, I wasn't just going to ignore that feeling anymore, that I was going to do it. It meant that when it's 10 o'clock at night and my body starts to get tired, I'm not just going to go, oh yeah, I can force myself to stay up till 12 or whatever. I have to change my behavior. And changing your behavior is the way that you begin to change the relationship. So that's the first thing you'll need to do. What I'd like you to do right now is take a clean sheet of paper and write down those roles, and write down what the dynamics of those roles have been. Whichever of those roles has been more dominant, whichever has been more submissive, whichever one has gotten its way more frequently, whichever one has been shoved aside, whatever. Write down what that has turned the relationship into. And once you do that, you'll have a very, very clear picture of the kind of amends that you need to make with the submissive, the more submissive ones, or the ones that simply have not gotten their way. It's incredibly important, and treat it the same way that you would treat it with another relationship. If you accidentally were to knock someone over on the sidewalk or trip someone, you stop and you help the other person up and you apologize. And of course, you try not to do things like that again. And this is the exact way that you need to do it with yourself. Every one of those selves in your head is of value, and they need to be respected. All of them need to enter into a mutually respectful situation so that there can become inner peace. Now that I have gotten to that point, and again, I constantly struggle, even still, but now that I have gotten to that point, I call my inner selves the committee, because they're united and they all have different roles, they all have different purposes, but our overall goal is to be whole and healthy and look out for the good of our self, the whole self. Probably the best thing about all of this is that your self-respect is going to shoot through the roof. If you have been somebody who has plowed other people over before, now that you're not doing that to yourself, you will be more likely not to do that to other people. If you have been somebody who has been plowed over by other people, you are no longer going to allow that to happen. So this is very exciting. You now have rules for civil dialogue within yourself, that at least there is mutual respect. And when you take that out into your relationships with other people out into the world, you're going to be able to differentiate between people who will know how to enter into civil dialogue with you and people that are just not ready for that yet. And you'll know how not to even begin the conversation. You'll be able to pick your battles a lot more carefully, and hopefully not pick any battles. You'll be really working toward the side of, we're being done with battles. Now, if you have to, your self-respect will dictate that you have some teeth. You're not going to let people push you around,